Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series. This is our second webinar. We're super excited. We have a lot of information for you today, and we are hoping that you take this opportunity to interact with all of us facilitators and participate. You should have received your homework last week and also this morning. If you haven't, please let us know so Maria can make sure that you get a copy of it. One of the things that we asked you to do is to review the Beatriz case, as well as the Diana's case that we saw the last time that we got together. And we're going to continue learning from all these skits and again, in a very interactive manner. I wanna thank you, Carly, for being here today. Hi, Carly.
Hello.
And Carly, can you remind us who are you with?
I'm Carly Bush, and I'm with the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence in Lincoln.
Thank you, Carly. And Jennifer Cooley. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
And can you remind us who are you with?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Cooley, and I'm a professor of Spanish and the head of the Department of Languages and Literatures at the University of Northern Iowa.
All right. And Abby? Hi, Abby.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Abby Kretz, lead organizer with the Heartland Worker Center here in Omaha, Nebraska.
And Giselle, who is very much under the weather. So I don't know, Giselle, if you want to say hi, or I'll tell everybody who you are.
I can say hi to everybody. Happy to be here, even though my voice is going in and out today. I'm really sick.
Well, thank you so much, Giselle. Giselle is one of the top national bilingual psychologists in the nation, and she has been instrumental in many, many cases, and we're very fortunate to have her with us, even if she's under the weather and will be just commenting as needed. We hope that you don't have to say much, Giselle. So
I'll do my best.
Alrighty. And Maria. Hola, Maria. Maria Lazarino.
Hello, I'm here. I was muted. How are you?
And Maria is with Assista, and she's also very instrumental in making sure that everything runs and that we are on time, meeting all the deadlines for our work with you guys. So I just want to talk a little bit as you look at these images, which are very familiar to many of us. These are the survivors from the Postville case, and think that overall, immigrant workers are representing a very large share of the total U.S. labor force. And we can see them in major areas such as private household services, 42%, farming, forestry, fishing, 37%. And in looking only at the low-wage immigrants here in our nation, they share 44%, that's the percentage, in each of the above major labor areas. One of the reports that CNN published a while ago stated that most of the undocumented workers are concentrated in construction, in agriculture, and in cleaning jobs. So when we're talking about vulnerable survivors, we're talking about all these areas, and we're going to be encountering survivors in all these areas. And the reason why I wanted to give you this data and all these percentages and where we can find them is because there are many challenges that they face, not just the sexual violence in the workplace, but added on challenges that make escaping and surviving the abuse really challenging. So our job is not easy, but they are the ones enduring the crimes. What we want to do today is to talk about the dynamics of sexual violence in the workplace. Last time we met, we talked a lot about gender violence in general, and we provided you with a good framework of the issue and what we were talking about and why it was important that us as advocates working with immigrants knew more about gender violence in their lives. So today we're going to narrow down our focus, and we're going to remember in everything that we discussed last time, identify the risks that they're facing, which is very important in terms of pushing women to do something, to file an action, to file a complaint. So let's talk about what are the risks that they face. We're going to talk also about what is it that we're talking about, right? We keep saying sexual violence in the workplace, against immigrant women. What is it that we're talking about? What strategies can we come up to begin the work? And very important, our friend Carly, the coalition and the gender violence movement does something that they do a lot of very good things, but they also do very good work at self-care. Otherwise, we cannot continue to do the work. And at the end, we're going to talk a lot about how does the labor field in Nebraska look like? Who is in there? Who can we start thinking about as allies? And that's something that Abby will go over at the very end. So moving on and thinking about what is it that we're talking about. We're going to be throwing terms such as sexual harassment, sexual assault. One of the major resistance that we always have when we work with sexual assault advocates is, well, we don't cover sexual harassment. We cover mainly sexual violence, sexual assault. But the reason why it's important to go a step back and to go to the origin is because we have learned over and over in many of the cases that we've been working with, such as the DeCoster case, the Swift and Postville, that I will mention some of the cases and the details of the cases later. How women endure this sexual harassment in silence for weeks and months before they actually were sexually assaulted. So it's important to look at sexual harassment as preceding sexual violence and as part of sexual violence. We also know that the few that complain suffer horrendous retaliation, punishment through harder jobs, less hours of pay work, public humiliation, etc. So again, sexual harassment, and that of course sexual harassment is a red flag for further victimization, and it is also part of the dynamic of sexual violence in the workplace. So sexual violence is a form of sexual harassment is a form, therefore, of sexual violence. And it must be addressed immediately because, again, it's the red flag, the precursor to the sexual violence in the form of rape or other direct forms that we all are familiar with. As I mentioned in here, immigrant survivors report that supervisors were harassing them multiple times before completing a rape, and this is why it's so important that we look into this. So why are we talking about sexual violence, and why does it happen? And the one message that I want to provide to you and give to you today is that sexual violence is about power. And supervisors, some coworkers that are perceived as connected to supervisors, owners, and some staff that are part of the company or the workplace have power. They have power to hire or to fire. They can retaliate. They can confer certain benefits. And again, sexual violence in the workplace is fostered by an imbalance of power between the employer and all the people that I just mentioned, supervisors, coworkers that are perceived as having power or influence, etc. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about an imbalance of power. And it happens because, again, that inherent power that supervisors, coworkers, and other people around survivors have or are perceived to have. Very important too. And this is something that I want to share with you. As I was working with many of my cases, I never thought, and this was a horrible mistake, that the sexual abuse could happen from women to women, from women to men. I had the preconceived notion and pretty biased that sexual abuse happened mainly men to women, and that's because of all the cases that I was seeing. It wasn't until I worked in the postal cases that women started to disclose, it was very embarrassing for them that they were being sexually assaulted and had been sexually assaulted by a female supervisor. And the kids that I work with disclosed that they were being sexually assaulted by the male supervisor. And that was a really big lesson to learn, because indeed the perpetrator is not just a man exercising his power and control over a woman, but it can be of the same sex. It can be a supervisor, an agent of the supervisor or the company, an employer, a co-worker, a third party, again, with perceived influence to hire, fire, retaliate, etc. So this was a very important lesson. So another thing that I wanted to review is, how does sexual violence manifest in the workplace? And what is it that we're really talking about? And for that, I just want to share some information with my friend Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Sonia. How are you?
Good. So, Jennifer, look, I was, doing a presentation on immigration and, Immigration 101 and safety planning on immigration issues. And then when I started talking about your rights, and your rights as a survivor, maybe thinking about that U visa that we all lawyers like so much, I started having women coming up to me and talking to me and asking questions. So I want to run by you some of the stuff that they were telling me and see what you think, because I wasn't too sure whether it was sexual harassment or violence, or maybe it wasn't at all. So, like, for instance, my friend Lola, who was there, she told me that her coworker is telling a lot of sexual jokes to the male supervisor, and that he tells these jokes in front of all the female workers, and Lola and her colleagues feel extremely embarrassed. So I feel that this is wrong, but what do you think? Is this sexual harassment, or what? What is
Well, I'm
it?
wondering, so this is a group of female workers, and it sounds to me like the supervisor is a male supervisor. And did you tell me that all the workers are Latinas as well?
Yeah, they are.
Well, it doesn't sound like a very good workplace setting to me. What else did your friend Lola tell you?
Well, only that in addition to that, on top of it, then when this male supervisor or friend talks about all these like really bad sexual jokes, then the supervisor starts making fun of all the female Latinas. He calls them hot mamas, and then he proceeds to explain a sexual joke in detail, like in graphic detail, like they care about it. And Lola was just telling me that I said, well, what do you do? And they said, well, we just listen in silence.
Well, it definitely sounds like that he's creating a sexualized environment in the workplace.
And is this wrong?
Yes, it is. It also sounds like it could very easily escalate into something even more serious.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I guess we can just tell Lola to perhaps first and foremost, if she feels safe, tell the coworker to stop, right?
I think so. I mean, that would be the first approach, is just to ask this person to stop. And if not, maybe report it to a supervisor if that would be possible.
Right. Yeah, there are lots of things here, lots of things to think about in here, right? Because we don't know really. I mean, we would need to ask Lola more about the supervisor and what capacities he's supervising, and whether there are other supervisors that may be more friendly to listen to this, and whether that supervisor may punish them for talking about it, right?
I do think it's good that she opened up to you, and hopefully she's keeping good notes about when and where and the frequency of these things that are happening.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, actually, Sonia, now that you mention it, I've been working with a friend. Her name is Conchi. And Conchi, yeah, she works at a diner, and she's a waitress. She works the evening shift. She's usually on from like 4 till 10. And the owner makes her wear this really tight and revealing uniform. And he insists that she have it unbuttoned very low, and he even goes as far as to tell her that she has to wear a black bra. Yeah, and he says, "Oh, don't be embarrassed about it. You're just showing off what God gave you." So, and he also suggests that if she dresses this way, that she's probably going to get better tips, and that the customers are going to be happier.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to compare Conti to Lola and Lola's friends' experience, but it looks like it's a bit more accentuated and clear in the case of Conti, because obviously Lola and her friends are working in a sexualized environment, and that is sexual violence in the workplace, right? And that is a super red flag for what's coming or could come after that. But in the case of Conti, it looks like, even stronger. I mean, it looks like it's indirect sexual abuse, because maybe there is nothing directed, physically directed to her, but if she's required to wear provocative clothes or show cleavage, and flirt, or, flirt to attract victims, business, I'm sorry, that's definitely a victimization tactic. And yeah.
This is what her boss tells her to do at work. And also when she gets to work, she has to change into her uniform. And when she goes into the changing room, she told me that she's seeing posters of naked women there and other obscene pictures. And she really just doesn't feel safe.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, definitely. Again, I don't know if you're gonna see Conchi pretty soon, but first thing would be to sort of document what is happening. Maybe keep a diary. If she feels mentally sane by putting it in writing, maybe we can refer her to some of the sexual assault advocates to get more information about her rights in general. But definitely, again, if she feels safe, she should not wear provocative clothes. Hopefully she won't be fired. One, and two, make clear that she feels uncomfortable to HR or to the owner, right, or to a coworker. At least she has some witness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Jennifer, it looks like we've been talking about direct sexual abuse, indirect sexual abuse, creating sexualized environment. So can you give us more examples? I mean, we have the chart in here. We touch on some of these things, but can you mention some of these things?
So some of the things that have come up just in our little short conversation here is the idea of using obscene language or gestures, requiring someone to wear a provocative uniform, talking or making allusions to sexual activity or preferences. Also, sometimes these things can escalate. So they can easily escalate into indecent proposals. For example, sexual innuendo has already been present in what we've been talking about, intimate references. And sometimes, in fact, these sorts of issues in the workplace could turn into something that would be closer to direct sexual abuse. So maybe they would easily turn into unwanted caresses or groping or fondling, touching or rubbing, forced nudity or someone being forced to undress. Those are sort of the next step in what could become a much more serious situation in the workplace. Yeah,
and so Jennifer, I just wanted to mention something and hear your thoughts on it. I had this case where this woman was being paid $7 an hour, which I'm not a labor law attorney or an advocate, but I think is a bit below the minimum wage. But anyway, so she is selling. She works at this meatpacking plant in Omaha, and so she approached the supervisor. That it looks like he's in charge of wage and raises and what have you, and tells him that she wants to at least get paid $8. She's already there for two full years, right? And so the supervisors said that if she was sweeter to him, she could get a lot more.
Wow.
So when I finished the presentation, she shared this with everybody, but then when I finished the presentation, she came to me and said, well, actually, I don't know, I don't want you to think anything bad of me, but I did have sex with him twice, right? And he did raise my salary to $8 because I was telling her, oh, you should sue him, blah, 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 right? You know, that lawyer talk that we always jump into.
Yeah.
And, you know, and she's like, well, you know, I did sleep with him. I had to sleep with him twice. He did raise my salary to 8. But now every time I see him like in the kitchen or, you know, the hallways, he's touching me, and so I don't know how to stop this or what to do. So she's, you know, what do you think about that?
Well, to me, this sounds really serious. It sounds to me like the person in the position of power offered something in exchange for a benefit. So, and then, you know, what could the worker do in that situation? She couldn't exactly say no, right? Because since he has that power over her. So that sounds like a really serious legal situation to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, first of all, you know, I couldn't help it. This is really bad, Jennifer, but normally we just jump into conclusion and we want to judge, right? Even though we are in our advocacy capacity and wanting to be open, but sometimes, you know, your gut tells you, your gut is like driving you to say, oh, wow, so she had sex, right? But, you know, then when you think about, was this consented, right?
Right.
And you see that element of coercion present, which involves a choice, but not a free choice, right?
Right.
And again, we see in here, again, the imbalance of power. And I think one of the major works that we need to do with the survivor, besides, you know, listening to her, talking about legal remedies, is how do we work with her? And I don't have the key to that, you know. And I'm sure that incredible advocates here that have experienced it, but how do we work with the survivor to move her from I feel horrible, I had sex, to this is a form of sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was coerced into it. You know, this is a quid pro quo situation where there is an imbalance of power, and therefore it is a form of sexual violence. Mm-hmm. And for her to have the guts to come out and say it, you know, and disclose this, I think she's already really brave, and that we need to help her move forward, right? And tell her about her potential remedies, ¿verdad?
Yeah, to me, this really points to the importance of talking about workplace sexual violence specifically, because the workplace often has those power dynamics that, you know, they have so many different variables in place. Whereas, you know, in a domestic violence setting, this would be a different situation. But in the workplace, that makes it that much more complex.
And so I think also it's important for us to remember all these types of physical sexual abuse or exploitation, which is the rape. I mean, that's super clear, no? The rape, the sexual assault, the harassment, the retaliation, the sex trafficking, stalking, all this, right, that they endure, pregnancies from the rapes, pornography. I had a client, like the example we were talking about, that she was forced to constantly, you know, to jump into the supervisor's office, and he will be watching porno, and, you know, and not stop, you know, or hide it. So everybody that went to him knew that was there and it was happening. So, but then, you know, remember other forms of abuse and exploitation, the voyeurism, hostility, intimidation, blacklisting, very important, you know, for farm workers, for instance, that have families that come to the same farms over and over. So if one of them perhaps dares to complain, then the entire family or that person in particular may be blacklisted, which means he doesn't get to work not only on that farm, but in any other farm anywhere else along the line, right? And we can go on, but I just want us to remember that this goes farther than just that physical abuse, and that there are other forms that we oftentimes miss the signs or the red flags that we should be considering when working with survivors. So then we talk about what it is, why it happens, some ways of identifying these dynamics, but there are also risks involved in the situation, right, Jennifer?
Exactly. So sometimes the risks can be specific to the industries. At the beginning of the webinar, you did talk about industries that tend to have high percentages of undocumented workers, and in particular women. So we can kind of zero in on 4 key industries like housekeeping, food processing, or working in a plant that deals with food, farm work, and also restaurant work, which could be waiting on tables or working in the kitchen or working as a dishwasher, things like that. There are some risks that are common to all 4 of these industries, but they also have some of their own specifics. So would you like to try to open it up to the group and see if they have some ideas?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So what are some of the risks that we saw a picture in one of the previous slides of some women standing out in the field, probably getting ready to harvest? What are some of the risks that would be specific to that industry of farm work?
And if you could, I'm gonna try to open mic
Okay.
to everyone, but let me see. Oops. So if you wanna raise your virtual hand up, I can open up the mic to participants so you can talk to us about your thoughts.
So the question is, and I think the photograph actually kind of will help us get started thinking about that particular line of work. What would be some of the risks that would be specific to harvesting, to working on a farm, in a farm setting?
This is Abby.
Hi, Abby.
Hi, I would say basically isolation, or
Exactly.
like the amount of ground that's covered. Like those fields are huge, so because of the work, the women or workers are very much kind of on their own a lot of times.
That is a great one. And also when you think about how do those people get to that workplace to perform those tasks? Often people who work on those large expanses of land have to depend on a supervisor or a company person to actually haul them there. So the transportation is sort of intertwined with even being able to perform your job. So you have to depend on someone kind of in the system to even get yourself out to that workplace setting.
I would even go beyond that too, stating that sometimes they even live in like company apartments or housing. So that kind of also creates another dynamic, another power dynamic, I would say as well.
That's true. So you're totally dependent on your employer. That makes you definitely be in a position where you don't feel like you want to take any risks about opening your mouth and making any complaints. If even the roof over your head depends upon that person who's your employer. Okay, so a similar sort of work, but that does pose some other kinds of risks would be housekeeping. I guess we would kind of group under housekeeping, perhaps also domestic workers so the housekeeping could be taking place in a hotel setting, or it could also be taking place in an individual home. What are some of the risks you might think of for that industry?
Hi, this is Yahaira with the Heartland Worker Center.
Hello.
Hi. I was thinking about the last scenario with the woman out in the field. I was thinking about the environment just because it would be, I'm guessing, very hot outside.
Excellent.
Their health might be in jeopardy. So they would be asking maybe to go to the bathroom or to go inside just to cool down. And I think that raises in a kind of an environment where they depend on the supervisor to get that permission, basically.
That's a really good observation. There are also lots of reports about really harsh chemicals that are often used in industrial farming, in really large open expanses of farm area. And those chemicals could certainly be debilitating to you as well if you're working with them all day, every day. Okay, should we think about the housekeeping or domestic workplace setting? What are some of the risks that you might find specific to that industry?
This is Abby again.
Okay.
Sorry. I would say basically, again, isolation, since a lot of times you work behind closed doors that can easily be locked, kind of that intimate setting. it's harder to escape or have others witness anything when you're working alone or behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm. Again, there's also the issue of sometimes there are harsh chemicals involved if you're doing domestic work or housekeeping. A lot of times there's really a lot of pressure to create some sort of perfection. So you have to work to make something look perfect. And many times there's a lot of stress to work very quickly. Those are sort of layer upon layer of stressors that could be occurring in the workplace. But I think the big one is certainly that people would be working on their own behind closed doors. So there's not a lot of chances to have somebody be a witness to something that could be occurring in the workplace, or maybe there's nobody to turn to. Maybe you just have a supervisor and that's the only other person that would be around. Are there any other ideas about that, about housekeeping or domestic work? We did have an example earlier today about a restaurant setting. Any ideas about things that are specific to a restaurant workplace or food preparation in a kitchen? Is that workplace bringing any ideas to mind?
Hi, Jenny.
Special challenges? Yep.
Hi, Maria. There are some comments. If you see on the questions, Lauren Rivas is saying many don't want to lose their jobs.
Ah, uh-huh.
Do you see the comments? Or being alone in the field may often outnumber females in farm work. There are some comments in there also for the housekeeping, domestic water settings. It says harassment from homeowners or costumes in addition to power of employers.
Exactly. So the person who is paying your wages may just be that very same person who is making this be an abusive workplace setting. These are really good comments. Thank you for pointing them out. I wasn't sure how to get them in. I can see them.
You see them? Okay, thank you.
Yes. It's true. Another person has listed the comment that males often outnumber females in farm work. That's a really, really good observation as well. Okay. There are lots of tight spaces in a restaurant. That's true. Mm-hmm. Restaurants. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I would also say like the idea of low wages. So you're basically working for tips and trying to make all that. There's a lot of pressure to make sure that all the customers are happy because it's kind of a stressful environment because it's so, moving very quickly. There can be a lot of yelling from what I've heard from folks.
Mm-hmm. So it's also very performance based. You're sort of you're vulnerable because you don't have a very high hourly wage, and you're so much of your earnings will depend directly on your performance and perhaps your physical appearance and how you conduct yourself with clients. I think that would definitely add an increased layer of stress.
And Alexis, yeah. I open Alexis' mic. She has something to say.
Okay.
Oh, hey. I just submitted the comment in writing. I wasn't really sure how this is working. Suggesting that another pitfall of working in a restaurant in the context of sexual harassment and violence is that there are really tight spaces like the kitchen prep area, walk-in refrigerators, and it makes it easier for, there are a lot of non-consensual contact that happens in those situations because I think that there's privacy that emboldens a perpetrator, and then they can kind of write that off as like, oh, it was tight and I didn't mean to bump into you, or you're just sort of imagining it. So those are vulnerable spaces.
Mm-hmm. That's a really, really insightful comment. I also see from Athena Ramos, lots of dangerous equipment in kitchens, knives, stovetops, etc. So yeah, there's another whole layer of risk, which just has to do with that sort of a workplace where food prep is taking place. How about in a factory setting or a food processing or preparation setting that would be more like a factory? What are some of the potential risks for that kind of a workplace?
would say injuries related to repetitive motion,
Exactly.
again, large equipment that you can get injured on, slippery floors, depending on what you're doing.
Right. So a factory setting it poses its own special risks, which a lot of times have to do with the whole concept of an assembly line or a line where you have to stand still and do a repetitive motion throughout the day. That can also just put you physically in a vulnerable position, as does harvesting. You know, if your body has to always be doing the same thing over and over again, sometimes you're actually looking down, which leaves you more vulnerable as well. Your hands are tied or your hands are occupied doing your work. A lot of times, food processing settings will have dangerous chemicals, as you suggested, maybe slippery floors, maybe, again, maybe there's going to be knives or big machinery that would increase risk. Those are all really, from the comments that I can see here, let's see, factory setting. I'm sorry, I'm catching up. It's a fast-paced setting, and it's often loud. There are lots of people yelling. That's true. That can be very unsettling as well. And there's also always a chance that there are tasks that are sort of more dangerous and less dangerous within an assembly line or food processing setting. So there could be the threat that someone would be reassigned to a less desirable position along the line, or something that would be more risky. These are all really good comments. I have a feeling that you folks may have worked with real people who have worked in all of these different workplace settings. So should we move ahead to the next slide? Okay.
When I arrived at the hotel, I had to watch a video, and then I started to work. They expected me to clean really fast, but I had no idea how to do anything. They screamed at me, but I said to myself, if this is what I have to do to care for my children, I'll do it.
Didn't the other people help you or show you how to do the cleaning?
Oh no, we couldn't talk at work. There was a manager, he was so impatient. He would start saying,
"Hey, quiet, quiet!"
He would scream at us and call us names.
What's the noise, bitch?
He would come in and start saying,
"Work it, finish your room, come on! Look, faster, bitch."
The more he would yell, the more he would shake and turn red. But I worked well. Still, every day was like a nightmare when I worked there.
What in particular?
How do you say? There was also a lot of grabbing and touching and invitations.
Sexual harassment?
See. So if you worked there, you never knew what could happen to you. There was a manager, a man with a wife and kids, but he was always chasing after the younger women. He would threaten to take their jobs if they didn't do what he wanted.
Did he ever approach you?
Yes. At first, he said he just wanted to take me out to dinner to spend some time alone with me. And if I said no, I would lose my job, and so would my husband.
So what did you do?
I just laughed and I told him no because there weren't any restaurants in town good enough for me. But then, one night, I got off work earlier than my husband, and so the manager followed me out to the parking lot. There was no one around, and so he came up behind me and he grabbed me by the hips. He said to me,
"You were just playing hard to get, but I know that you want me.
No,
You've always wanted me.
Let go of me."
Do you want to lose your job?
Then some other workers came into the parking lot and saw what was happening. He just straightened up and walked away.
Did you ever report this?
Are you kidding? I didn't want to lose my job or my husband's either.
I guess it's okay that we're projecting the credits so that you know that the people involved in this are actors. So this is based on a real story, but the people who did this scene were all acting, just in case you were wondering. So when you think about some of the risks that actually did play out in this workplace setting, what were some of the things, what were some of the factors that that put Beatriz so that she felt like it was risky to report what was going on at work? What are some of the things that she mentions, the specifics of her situation? Let's see, so, I'm getting some comments in here. Okay, so one of the things she does mention is that if she reports this, she is fearful that she may lose her job. And since her husband is employed at the same workplace, she also does mention, I didn't want to lose my job or my husband's either. Okay, any other risks that she mentions or that we can gather from the report that she and her husband are working at the same place? Yeah, exactly. So there is certainly the possibility, at least, that she'll feel ashamed. How will her husband react if he finds out about what's happening at work? Will he actually go ahead and blame her? So that would be another reason why she would maybe be reluctant to report this. That could be an issue, whether or not the husband was not employed at the same place. I mean, even if he wasn't, but there's even a higher risk associated with her reporting since her husband is actually in the same place. She didn't want her husband to leave her. It's very possible that her husband would, take offense or something, or would himself feel ashamed. Maybe that would trigger that kind of reaction in her husband. What other issues might be at stake that would pose a risk to Beatriz actually telling her story? When we think about a situation where both husband and wife are employed at the same workplace, that suggests to us that their entire income is dependent upon this one workplace. So, they would be worried about providing for their kids. Certainly, that would be another issue. If one or potentially both, so someone actually wrote here, providing for children, the stigma coming from other coworkers and potentially from the community, if people in the survivors group of friends or church would find out about this, income is certainly going to be an issue. One of the things that is suggested in the scene, but it wasn't really emphasized in the scene, there's a point at which Beatriz says, sí. So one of the things that could happen is that there could be a language barrier to someone reporting. If advocates are able to speak the same language as a survivor, that certainly alleviates that issue. I don't think that we have mentioned this in our comments yet, but there are lots of issues that could potentially arise if someone has an immigration status that would put them at greater risk for reporting. Sometimes people don't want to make waves if they're undocumented because they don't want that to be a trigger for them to be deported. So there are always a lot of risk factors that are sort of circling around the needs of the survivor. So there may, as much as there may be a desire to report, a desire to open up, there also sometimes perceived a price to pay for doing, for opening up and for telling someone about these workplace issues. So another person says you could be blacklisted. This could impact your ability to get employment after this. If she were to lose this job and try to move on to another workplace setting, this might actually have a long-term impact. Yahaira also says physical dominance. Oh yeah, the guy, I remember the woman who told me the story. The manager, the supervisor, the boss is sort of a very angry individual. So she's actually dealing with two different supervisors. One of the supervisors just becomes irate and gets red in the face. He gets angry, he gets violent. And then it's actually another supervisor who's the one who ultimately finds her in the parking lot. So she's actually in a situation where she's dealing with two very sort of aggressive and dominant male people who are in supervisory positions. It was quite a challenge. So physical dominance is definitely part of this as well. She could be fearful for her own basic well-being at the workplace.
I would like to say something, if I may.
Yes.
And what happened is that in that case, we see what it happens often, and it is that when a place of employment starts showing signs in which one of the supervisors is starting to groom or sexually harass the employees, it really functions as if he or she is giving permission to others to do the same. And that's when sometimes it's like a roller coaster that then the entire environment becomes very sexualized and very dangerous.
Thank you, Giselle. That's a really, really good comment as well.
All
So,
right. Oh,
go ahead.
no, go ahead. So, well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I know that we could hear all day long just talking about risks, which are many. But what I would like to do is to point our participants to the slide that they have in front of them, because we've been identifying risks and risks of reporting, right? And when we're encouraging someone to report, is not, we shouldn't encourage the reporting without making an analysis of what her needs are. Oftentimes I get calls from advocates saying, hey, you know, we have identified this woman, this is going on at work, I think she has a case, and it's like, whoa, slow down. What is her plan or your plan? You know, obviously, if she is working, it's because she needs the money. And she needs the money to take the kids to school, to pay her house, to get transportation. She may have some health issues, and she may have insurance through that place of employment. She may not be very proficient in English. She may have communication barriers. Maybe she is undocumented, and that's the only place where she has been able to get a job, right, under the table, or using something that, you know, helped her get that job. She has dependents. She may be also experiencing domestic violence or other forms of abuse at home from her own family. So is she going to have family support? Does she have to send money to her country of origin because she has left 2 or 3 kids behind and has to continue to provide for them to eat, right? So it is very important, again, as we know about her rights and we know about her potential remedies, that we analyze risks as in physical imminent risks, as well as life generated risks, and analyze again what her needs are. So as we talk about, or we think about working with survivors and think about safety first, also analyze all the entire spectrum of threats. You know, it could be threats from the violence, threats as perceived, threats from coworkers, from employers, from the perpetrator. But again, as we are trying to create strategies and safer environments and work with labor organizers, unions, labor advocates, in contact and in coordination with sexual violence or gender violence advocates, I think that there are many steps that we can take, but 4 basic steps that at least, you know, we should consider. And the first one is educate. And thank you, all of you, for being part and taking these webinars and going through the homework and taking your time to read, because education is the first step in understanding what is it that you're dealing with, right? So advocate, support efforts to organize from unions and co-workers in cases where sexual violence happens in the workplace. You know, help people to advocate and organize around getting time off to go to doctors, therapists. You know, are there any protocols for it? Referrals is the number 3. Make sure that you and your peers have a resource file developed and handy to call or help with referrals. And that's one of the goals of our project, that you talk to each other, that you know each other, that you refer each other potential survivors. And secure. Make sure that you and your peers receive training on how to respond to a crisis or emergency situation. And this is something that I'm very excited and looking forward when we have our roundtable, you know, more hands-on and taking care of all this in a more comprehensive manner. Talking about it. So talking about it can be one of the hardest things to do for the survivor, for the labor advocate, for the gender violence advocate. Does the survivor wants to disclose? Are we pushing too hard? You know, are we making her, is she ready to talk about it? What is it that she really wants? You know, a lot of the cases that I work with, she wants to keep her job at the end of the day. And you know, in one of the cases that I work with, many women, this was a class action of a large group of women suing the Costers, Iowa farms. And I was personally, I just didn't understand why women went back to work there. And this is what they were telling me from the beginning. I want the sexual violence to stop. I want to keep my job in a safe way, in a safe manner. So that was hard to process for me, because we won their cases. You know, the EEOC sued the Coster and we got new visas. So now they had, you know, they have enough money to move on. They have secure immigration status, yet they went back to the same place. So the lesson from there is listen to the women when they're telling you, I just want the abuse to stop, right? So who is your ally? What are the obstacles, etc.? So as you're thinking about talking about it, right? You need to consider all these things. So let's do this exercise. If you are with someone else, please do this exercise. If you're alone, just talk out loud to yourself. You know, that's gonna be a crazy exercise. But I want you to, in the next 2 minutes, just 2 minutes, or actually it's gonna be 1 minute. I'm gonna time it. In the next 60 seconds, I need you to start sharing with the person that is next to you the last consensual sex experience that you had in detail. The last consensual sex experience that you have in detail. Ready? Think about it. Think about it. Ready? And go. Okay, I'm stopping at 45 seconds. Okay, without sharing the details of the conversation, can anyone share with the rest of the participants emotions? What did you feel? How did you feel? Anyone? You can write about it too if you don't want to say it. That's fine. Okay, so we have happy. What else? Come on, you gotta give me at least 2 or 3 more comments.
Ah,
Carly, how did you feel?
Well, I was sitting alone in my office and I was uncomfortable, so I can only imagine if I'd had someone in here with me discussing that. Even though it would have been a happy memory, I'm not very comfortable talking about it to someone.
Okay, so you felt self-conscious alone on your own and embarrassed on your own. Okay, how about Athena? Athena Ramos, how did you feel about it? You can type it too, Athena. Someone says, really glad I'm alone here. Okay, well, that's it. Point taken. No, not easy to talk about it. So thank you. So I wanted to do this happy, right? This happy fun exercise just to direct your attention to, if you have all these mixed emotions, it's something private, right? It's something that you chose. It's something not traumatic. Imagine, the pressure, the stress, and the mixed feelings that someone that has been violated, assaulted, that has endured a traumatic experience has. And also, what are the consequences of talking about it? How do we talk about it? How do we start that conversation, right? So these are a few tips that I put together. By all means, there is no like magic formula. As you work more with these cases and with these issues, as you learn more about yourself and things that work and don't work, and you help us, with good tips. These are just a few things that have worked in some cases, which is, instead of being upfront and aggressive and pushy about, well, did this happen? Did he do this? Did he do that? Just step back. Step back and get a step removed from the actual issue that perhaps you suspect or you heard is going on. Everybody can talk about money, right? Everybody can talk about supervisors. Everybody can talk about others, the gossip. So those are good conversations to have to analyze a bit the situation and offer more help or more education or information as needed. For instance, we all know that unfortunately sexual abuse in the workplace, sexual violence in the workplace is not something that happens alone and isolated from other crimes or from other discrimination issues or other dynamics against the workers. So questions such as, are they paying you all your hours? Are they paying you overtime? When was your last raise? Did you have to have a conversation for the last raise to happen? How did the conversation go? What did you have to say, or what happened for that raise to happen? How are they treating your co-workers? Did you hear of any complaints? What do you see? Again, removing perhaps a survivor from her own victimization. How does your supervisor treat other co-workers? How do male supervisors treat other co-workers, or female supervisors treat other co-workers? Any one is mistreated, disrespected, and if it happened, what did you see? What did you experience, or what did others experience, etc. Did any of your supervisors on sexual violence, just narrowing it a bit more, again, not have you ever been raped by your supervisor? I guarantee you're gonna get a no immediately without blinking. So again, step back. Did any of your supervisors ever ask you to go out with them, pressure you into dating them, offer you something in exchange for something? What happened if you say no? Like in the Postville cases, women that said no to invitations for lunch from supervisors were punished. And the punishment, I remember in one of the first cases that I worked in that raid, the punishment was for a female that weighs about 105 pounds to carry 40 pounds boxes all day long, 9-hour shift non-stop. And if she was to stop, he would harass her and threaten her with being fired. Pick up your stuff. You're not picking up the pace, you're gonna be fired. So that was the response from not, being open to that invitation. When I ask about, when you say invitation, I mean, was just lunch? Do you think that, if you would have eaten a burger with him, this would have stopped? And then I learned that the lunch meant, I'm gonna take you to a very nice restaurant, a Mexican restaurant in town, in Postville. From there, I will pay for your lunch, and then I will take you to the nearby motel where we will have sex, and then I will take you back to work. So everybody knew what lunch meant, right? Except for me. And then I had to ask, and then I learned what it meant, So again, those questions and in-depth questions and talking about others and removing the survivor from her own experience is what perhaps opens up later the conversation and identification of the actual abuse, right? So for you advocates that work all day long with immigration cases, and that you help attorneys, and that you do counseling, and that, unfortunately part of your job or your work, the work that you do to help in cases is collect the experiences of the survivors in writing, right? As you already know, unfortunately, the information is important for survivors to be successful in their own claims. So thinking about ways of making it easy for them. What was the very first incident that happened that made you feel scared? Not going to the actual rape, but when was the first thing that you felt uncomfortable? And from there, did it escalate? And giving the room for the survivor to disclose more or less, and work at her own pace, right? Find out about the grooming. Maybe she feels more comfortable talking about the grooming, the precursor, than the actual assault, right? So again, I'm not a psychologist, and our psychologist is under the weather, but we have written more details in our guide. And as you're going through this, above all, labor advocates, please partner with your gender violence advocates so you don't do this alone. Because as we're going to learn in a little bit, this can be very traumatizing for the survivor, but also for yourself. And throughout the whole process, the key is always survivor-centered advocacy, empowering the survivor and giving back the power that perhaps she lost during the victimization. Help her think about what her bottom line is, not yours, not mine, right? Not the lawyer's one, not the advocate's one, but her own bottom line is at her own pace. Help her to make her own decision and feel comfortable about those decisions that she's making, right? And keep the focus on a violence-free environment and life. So as we're talking about working with trauma and unfortunately eliciting those details that may be very impacting, is very important to take care of yourselves. And that's why we have Carly talking about self-care. Carly?
Thanks, Sonia. Self-care, I think for those of us who are in the domestic violence and sexual assault field, we hear a lot about, but it's equally as important for the folks on the labor side, just basically because you are going to be seeing, obviously a substantial overlap into the field that I've been practicing in. And self-care, just basically at its most core level, refers to the things that you can do for yourself that allow you to keep being able to do your job and to be an advocate for others. One of the reasons care is so very important is the what is called vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma, and again, I'm just going to read from the slide for this one because it's important to emphasize. It's the cumulative effects of working with survivors of traumatic life events, such as rape, incest, child abuse, or domestic violence. And 3 important things to know about vicarious trauma are that it manifests differently in each individual. The way that I may feel things and suffer from vicarious trauma could differ from someone else, even if we're looking at the very same issues. Vicarious trauma is cumulative, and it basically affects people more and more intensely over time, and more intensely over the multiple, victim survivors that you're working with. And unfortunately, it's also really pervasive. It affects all areas of the advocate's lives, and it includes, your work, which obviously, because it's part of that, but also emotions, outside relationships, and just generally their views on the world. Now, where this really, to kind of explain what vicarious trauma is in a little more, Maria, would you mind advancing the slide really quick, please? Thank you. Where this really comes into play, so what is vicarious trauma? I gave you the basic information, but how does it manifest itself? And, first, it's with feelings of vulnerability. And, basically hearing all of these traumatic stories can actually affect you in ways that you don't think about. For instance, maybe you start feeling paranoid that you're being followed. If you're hearing lots of sexual abuse stories, worrying that your children will be sexually abused, or potentially even, staying home more often, it manifests itself in showing, basically that, that what you're seeing happening to other people makes you feel more vulnerable yourself for you and your loved ones. And the one caveat I would say with the feelings of vulnerability is, in this work, the paranoia about being followed could actually not be paranoia, just because there is the certain risk that's just kind of inherent that you'll, sometimes a perpetrator is not always limiting their harassment to the victim survivor themselves. But other ways that vicarious trauma can manifest itself is difficulty in trusting people. And it makes sense when you consider that, hearing about the worst things that people can do to each other would affect the way that you view trusting other people. And so ways that, kind of as some examples of the difficulty trusting in the context of the work we do is, for instance, feeling that you're better off alone than in a relationship, being hesitant to meet new people, questioning the behaviors of your own loved ones. And then kind of really getting to a changed view of the world, which kind of encapsulates everything else. And that essentially can really, really change the way that the advocate looks at the world. So, you may come into this work wanting to, make the world a better place, seeing it as, most people, as essentially good. But when repeated stories are told to you, you're really getting to the point where thinking that maybe the world is not a good place, and that could manifest itself in feelings of pessimism, cynicism, anger, hopelessness, depression, and injustice. Those are just a few examples. And what's unfortunate about this is that with all of this, this can impact your ability to actually be able to emphasize and work effectively with survivors. So it's something that is of huge importance to do, and to recognize in yourself, and then to take care of yourself. And then so basically, what can you do to minimize vicarious trauma? I really like this very brief and to the point, and it's easy to remember. It's know your ABCs: awareness, balance, and connection. Awareness, being aware that this work can affect the way that you feel, the way that you react to situations, the way that you interact with other people. And you could take some time to reflect on your own through journal writing, or possibly with therapy or counseling, or talking with a supervisor, are, you know, kind of some things that you can at least be aware of how things are going. Then balance, maintaining healthy boundaries between work and home life. You know, having hobbies that are not related to your work at all, and that are interesting and fulfilling to you. Other things to consider are learning to relax through meditation, quiet activities, or exercise. All of these things can serve to basically restore you emotionally. And then the last one, connection. Having supportive colleagues or peers can help reduce that feeling of isolation, and it offers the opportunity to share experiences. It's also an important way to develop and nurture trusting relationships. And basically, you know, when it comes to vicarious trauma, you know, you will experience it, but I think even those of us who have been doing this work for a really long time, self-care and learning how to effectively deal with vicarious trauma is always a work in progress. And so, you know, just try to be aware of it and do your best to take the steps using the ABCs to minimize it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carly. Does anybody have any questions for Carly, or any experiences or examples of self-care that works for you in your life? I know advocates are really awesome about this, and just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to share. Give us good ideas. Carly, what?
Nobody.
What do you do, Carly?
Well, I was thinking about this. I play volleyball, and so tonight I have got a lovely double header where I'm going to play 2 hours straight of volleyball. And honestly, running around a ball and trying not to let it hit the floor is one of the most therapeutic things.
So don't drop the ball, no, Carly?
Don't drop the ball. Just keep running.
Anyone else? Any of our facilitators? Abby, what do you do yourself to keep yourself mentally healthy and sane when you see all the atrocities that are going on in our work?
I like to run.
Yes.
You like to
Just you don't have to think about anything, and there's no phone with me, so that's the best part.
This is Michelle at the Coalition, and talking about balance, one of the things that's been most helpful for me, Carly talked about how it can change your worldview. So I've been doing this work for 16 years, and at least 40 hours of my week, every week, is talking about, thinking about, reading about, hearing about sexual assault, right? So if I were going to base my worldview based on only what I saw at work, then like 99% of the population has been sexually assaulted, right? If I had to judge based on what I see, right? And we know it's high, but it's not that high. So one of the things that's been really important for me is to see other examples of relationships and people, right? So we know there's healthy relationships out there. Intentionally exposing myself to that is important. Having things that counter the negative imaging all the time. So one day I just had heard too much stuff. And so I went onto Facebook and I said, I want somebody give me examples of people not being jerks. And I got this huge line of comments of people sharing articles and stuff of people that, you know, did good and were helping people out. And that's been really, really helpful for me to combat that sort of like the world is terrible kind of depression.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
What else? Anyone else?
I can say also for myself that for me, one of the frustrations is rather with the system. And with the little assistance, and the discrimination to immigrants in the larger systems. So for me to really work on advocacy when there's some kind of any kind of activity related to immigrant women, violence against women, to put my 5 cents into that gives me a sense that I am working on the larger systems as well.
That's great. Because you do hear a lot of stuff, Giselle, day in and day out.
Right, right.
Okay, anyone else before we move on? Any other? So I want to say these, and maybe Giselle now she's going to diagnose me with some with some stuff that I have to work on. But, sometimes I hear horrible things, and I don't know if it's self-care or not, but I cry. I cry, not with my client because I don't want to take that, that from her. She's the one that got hurt, right? And she's the one that is going through this. But just talking to other peers about what a horrible thing happened to her and maybe getting emotional and crying about it, it makes me feel that, okay, now that I've cried about it, I'm going to work about it, right? And move on with her and help her move on and see what we can do about it. So, I thought that, maybe crying was a failure or or not overcoming or not getting taken care of. But I find it very therapeutical, and I don't cry easily, but once in a blue moon when something really hits home and it really gets to my core, just doing that helps. So there is a story that we have in the guide that is called The Broken Doll. I don't know if you have heard about the story of the broken doll. And it's about the story of this little girl that comes home and she's, very upset about her friend, and her doll broke and her friend was crying, and, and then she tells the mother, the mom said, well, did you cry because you felt bad about her doll being broken? And she said, no, mommy, I just stay with her and help her cry, right, about it. So, whatever works for you, and nothing wrong with it, whatever works for you to make you stronger and to make you keep going, right?
Actually, Sonia, if I can intervene, I think that crying is a sign that you have not become desensitized to these horrible human experiences, because that is one of the of the signs of burnout. When people tell you these horrible things and you just shake it off like, oh well, that happens to everybody, kind of thing. That's one of the signs of burnout.
All right, so I can then keep on working on this, no? Alrighty. So, so again, let's go back to the whole purpose of all these that we're doing, which is integrating everything that you guys, labor advocates, do so amazingly, and building new collaborations to make sure that we have great responses to survivors, right? We need to do this together. And if you go to the sexual assault programs, they really are pretty stretched out thin. They don't have enough resources for all the work that they do. They don't really have access to workplaces, so labor advocates, invite them to come with you, to come, and help you, to come and listen to what the work that you do. Some of them, unfortunately, when we started working on this many years ago, used to say, well, that's not part of my grant. So, I don't do that because that's not included in my grant, right? thinking that there was no direct connection with the sexual harassment, sexual violence, and the work that they were doing. So I think it is everybody's business to partner to look into this, regardless of where the money comes from. And we all know, because we're pretty savvy, that when we have a cause, we make it fit into our grant one way or another. We find a good explanation for why we are doing just this one case or these 5 cases that are coming down, and get, the groundwork done for the next grant or for the next funding opportunity, right? And with that in mind, we have our friend Abby, who is going to talk to us more about the work that they do in Nebraska, who they do it with, how they do it. So go ahead, Abby.
Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, with the Heartland Worker Center, so we've been around since about 2009, and I think there's just been a plethora of issues that have affected the immigrant working community here in Nebraska. And so trying to work with people who have been victims of various violations of their worker rights, and then from there trying to work with them to advocate to either find remedies for the issues that they've confronted, or to put them in contact with private attorneys or others that maybe they can find that can help them find remedies for that. I think there's a large variety, or like a variety of issues that the immigrant worker community has confronted in terms of labor issues, such as wage theft, issues of health and safety, discrimination. We recently have confronted one where a group of workers were told that they couldn't speak Spanish in the workplace, or any other language other than English. And so trying to work with them to figure out, what are possible remedies for these, who do they need to partner with. We've partnered with Justice for Our Neighbors here in Omaha as well, to look at some of those legal remedies, both in terms of employment and immigration. If some of the companies have unions, working to partner with them too, to see what does the actual union contract say for that. And then I think also partnering with others throughout the rural area. So we've worked with about 5 other organizations, including Appleseed. I know Darcy's on the call, to also say like what's available in those areas. I will also say though that talking, because Nebraska is a right to work state, it also makes it hard to find better policies, or to have policies that are actually beneficial to some of the workers themselves. A lot of it is more focused on the company. So I think, as was mentioned earlier, also looking at some of those structural changes that have to be done in order to create a better work environment for workers here. I think one of those actually does include sexual violence as well.
So what are some of the strategies that you guys use to reach out to others? How do you do it?
Others as in other organizations, or
how do you engage
everything?
Yeah, how do you engage other people in your work that you do?
So the key thing that we do is community organizing, and so we look to find, train, and develop potential leaders from within the community. We've identified some potential leaders as they've come to our office because of specific workplace cases. At this point, where we're looking to organize a workers' rights training this Thursday, like a workers' rights 101. So people have kind of a general overview about what their rights are as workers. From that, and so who else are we connecting with? Because I think some of our work specifically is, people kind of might know that things aren't right, but they don't really know how to act on them. And how can through more training and education begin to act on some of those things? How can they engage others that they know to actually begin to speak out as well? So that's one thing. And then we do similar work in terms of building relationships with labor organizations. So, figuring out who does what, how they do things, and kind of some of the strategies that we work to kind of understand. I guess one example I have recently, we're trying to figure out the issue of wage theft here in Nebraska. And when we refer things to the state, they can only fight for, they can't really collect back pay for employers or for the employees. They can only collect, or they will only basically collect any citations that they might issue. So that still leaves a worker who did the work and wasn't paid without their wages. And so trying to understand how the system works and how can we begin to change some of that. But I think with that, how can workers themselves be more engaged within the process as well? So it's not just us doing the work for them, but how can they be engaged to also use their own experiences to change some of these policies?
Right. Anybody has any questions or comment? Our folks from the labor movement want to share anything that may have worked with them in terms of outreach or engagement or working with survivors? Alrighty. So maybe next time, no? Maybe next webinar, right? So coming up, we are gearing up towards our last series of webinars, and we're starting to prepare for our work, for our roundtable that is going to take place on December 1st. And it's going to be a whole day of nothing but working at the intersection and planning on, 2 or 3 things that we can do together to initiate this collaboration. But for the next and last webinar, since we've been talking so much about, gender violence and sexual violence and dynamics and what to do, etc., we're going to be providing more information to our sexual violence advocates from our counterparts. And I know that most of you have never worked with unions, for instance, or that you're not really in tune with the power of organizing. We talk about collective bargaining, low wage, wage bargaining, the right to unionize, the benefits of organizing and unionizing. And so we're going to be covering some of these concepts so you feel more familiar, and as you are working with the labor field and labor movement, you have a better understanding of their work as well. So we'll talk about those points, but we are also, for everyone, going to cover everything that advocates, regardless, of your field of work, should know to empower survivors to access justice. So we're going to turn it towards the end a bit legal, so at least not only you know about dynamics, both fields and how to work together, but also what are the remedies that you can offer and how you can empower survivors to access justice. So we're going to finish a little bit earlier today, which I think is good news for everyone, right? And we hope to see you and hear of you during our next webinar. And Maria, do we have that date for the October webinar? I think it's Monday, October 30th at 1 o'clock as well.
Yes, it's October 30th.
Alrighty. So I appreciate all of you participating. Please keep in touch. We're going to be sending a survey shortly because we want to make sure that you got all these basic concepts, and we also want to hear from you and see what else would you like to cover during our last webinar. We will be selecting a group of you to meet with us during our roundtable, and be ready to roll up your sleeve and work, because we're going to be working pretty fast and pretty hard on December 1st. And again, thank you so much to all our facilitators and presenters. Special thanks to Giselle, who is under the weather and still managed to be present. So thank you to all of you, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.